When I set up my business, I did something very similar to what Rohit mentioned. I wrote on a napkin our business plan with my business partner, which was be clever, be useful, have fun, and make money. And we took it to our bank, and they wouldn't give us any overdraft facility, any credit card. So we actually had to go and borrow a bit of money off my father, and luckily that was enough to get us going. But it might work with some people, it didn't work with us. Anyway, I want to talk to you, start the conversation about the trust paradox. And I think this is very interesting because this is a faith-based category. And when you talk to the average Joe, the people who know a lot and learn a lot, but who I would describe as intelligently naive about supplements, and particularly about omega-3, they take a lot of this on faith. And the important thing for us to understand when we think about those people is that they have no means of proving to themselves that this product is working. This is something which they understand is a product you take for the long term. You're in it for the long run. So you have to leap into the unknown and have no real sense of how it's working for you over time. It's not like rubbing a cream on and seeing your eczema disappear, or taking a vitamin C tablet and feeling as though you're fighting off a cold. It has no proof as you ingest it, and even over time, you can convince yourself that it's doing something, but you don't know quite whether you would be in the same boat if you hadn't taken it. And that is a very difficult space to operate within when you're trying to build trust with the consumer. One of the first charts that I've got to put up actually has a wrong piece of information on it, which I learnt this morning because I think you now have 30,000 scientific papers on your subject and 2,400 clinical trials. And as it was very clearly pointed out by Adam earlier, this is more clinical trials than ibuprofen, which hundreds of thousands of millions of people are taking all the time. And I think it's a really interesting space that you operate in, where you have so much and yet you can prove so little to the consumer. There has to be a problem. Now, some of those problems might be because it does so much. It works on skin, it works on hair, it works on nails, it works on concussion, it works on the brain, it works on the joints. And so many of those stories have already been exposed to the consumer. So it's very hard for something so panaceic to be believed as specifically right for any one thing. And it makes people unsure. They're not as sure-footed with the product as they might be if they picked a pot up and it said, this specifically works on that. And that's, I think, partly reflects something Rohit said, which is, one point, one story, one focus of attention. This almost is too clever for its own good. The other thing that's difficult is that there has been some negative press, and again that was alluded to earlier by Adam when he talked about one small story being blown out of proportion by, I think, the New York Times and the Washington Post and so on and so forth. A lot of that's happening, and I'll refer to it a little bit later on. And the third thing is really more about you and how you communicate to the consumer. So Jill will talk a lot about how the category is communicating to the consumer, but I can tell you what the consumer understands. And maybe what it will do is to help us think about new ways of communicating. So probably in my career, I have spoken to, well, tens of thousands of people, but I've done it qualitatively. So my focus of attention is not numbers. And in the spirit of transparency and trust, I'm not a scientist, but I have spent 25 years plus working in consumer healthcare qualitative research for all sorts of products, from pharma end products, things like migraine control, to toothpaste, to nutrients, to brain health products, for lots of different pharmaceutical companies and consumer healthcare companies. And very specifically, I've spent the last 3.5 years working with BASF Pronova, trying to understand more about how people think and what they do and what they want out of omega-3s. That qualitative understanding has involved ethnography, it's involved observation, but it's also involved some very deep questioning over long periods of time. We've revisited consumers more than once and talked to them in quite a deep and meaningful way in their homes, but also in the more traditional forms of focus groups. We've been online and offline, and we've gone all over the world to do this. So we've been to Asia, to Europe, and we've done quite a lot of work specifically in America as well. So how do we help people trust omega-3? How do we make the most of your assets and help reflect what they want in order to mean that there's a marriage of the two things? Because at the moment, it feels a little bit like this. It feels as though they can get an enormous amount of information, big fat information from omega-3 products and brands, and they've got an enormous amount of needs and wants from their health, and the two things are slipping past each other a little bit at the moment. It's like a slipstream, it doesn't quite click. But it's a really interesting time for you all because health has never been higher on the agenda, and supporting your own long-term health has also never been higher on the agenda, and being given the tools and equipment to support our own long-term health has also never been higher on our agendas. We're going to pick up Fitbits as we leave this room. I'm sure a number of us already have them, very generously given by one of the sponsors. We now understand more about food than we've ever understood before. Gluten-free diets have become not a disease-based diet, but a diet that people want to celebrate. We've understood that Mediterranean food is more compelling and more healthy for us than many others. Paleo diets have been talked about. We are beginning to understand the component parts of food in a way that we didn't ever before, and we can also start to judge our own bodies limb by limb, joint by joint, in a way that we couldn't in the past, and that technology is flying along. So we have to help people to see our role in that much more self-obsessed and self-empowering health agenda that's on its way. So let's start by thinking about the sorts of people that I've come across. I've probably spoken to 1,500 people qualitatively in the last 3.5 years about omega-3. And without question, all of them, with the exception of a few, are what I would describe as optimists. They're strivers, they're self-educated about health and how health works for them. They are very keen to be in control of their own destiny. They always think that they're slightly more extraordinary than everybody else. Sometimes they don't tell you that, but you can see it in their eyes. And they are often more extraordinary than other people in that they are able to control and have confidence in where they're going. Now, that might be in their careers, it may be in their families, it may be in what they eat and drink. But the other thing that helps us to see them as a pack or as a tribe is that they also believe they can lengthen the odds on dying early. Whether that's factually based or whether that's emotionally based, they all share that in common. They have this unswerving belief that somehow, some way, they're going to get further than the next person because of what they know and what they understand and what they've researched for themselves. To look at these people in a little bit more detail, I've borrowed a model originated by another market research company because theft is a great tool when it comes to giving a very clear understanding of attitudes, and this is a really nice model. All the people that I've spoken to who are connected to omega-3, they're either fans of it or they've taken it for the long term, or indeed they're evangelists for the product, are people who seek harmony in their lives, like things to be under control and positive. They self-improve and they seek better functionality. Now, that could be cerebral, it could be physical, it could be emotional, but that's what they seek. And they are very active in making that happen. I'd call them health orchestrators. I apologize for the layout of these charts. It seems to have gone wrong. It hadn't before. But they're health orchestrators. But interestingly, they have a shadow, and that shadow is worry and anxiety, and they fight that constantly. They try and bury the fact that ultimately they are going to die, and they don't want to think about it, or be ill, or be incapacitated. And the one thing that nobody who likes omega-3 is passive, or indifferent, or resigned. It's no good trying to talk to a group of people who are asleep or dormant about omega-3. It's much easier for you to talk to people who are engaged in their own health and want to be better. And looking at their personalities, interestingly, they split into extroverts and introverts, those who are more rationally driven and those who are more emotionally driven. And an axis chart is always a nice one to use just to remember. So the first bunch of people I've come across and we've met on a number of occasions are what we've described as preventers. And they're really interested in prophylactic health. So preventing something before it starts. They're often some of the earliest adopters of supplements. and nutrients, and some of the most well-read about how the way that they behave in terms of exercise and diet and sleep can improve their chances. They're always a very interesting bunch of people to speak to. They're relatively intense, they're quite serious, and they're quite measured in the way that they approach life. They are often anxious, but you don't see that anxiety. It's buried very deep. The second group are the redeemers. Now, you'll all have met the redeemers. They're usually older. They come to omega-3 slightly older in life. They've usually got a bit of a smoker's cough. Sorry, I bashed my microphone. Bit of a smoker's cough. They usually like a drink. They often party very hard. They're gigglers. They're great fun to have in the room. They're life and soul and central to any conversation that you have. But they've pushed it too far, and they know that they need to do something to repair the damage that they've done. And they seek redemption. So the reason that they use supplements and diet is to actually redeem themselves and to repair the damage that they've caused. And they use very particular language, which is very different from the language the preventers use. And you can see already one language, one set of codes to speak to all these different types of people in a market that's already very flooded, and a category that's already very confusing simply doesn't work very well. So the preventers love the notion of preventative language, preparing themselves, investing in their futures, a measured conversation. The redeemers really need somebody to say, I've solved it, I've fixed it, here it is, take this away, you're going to be reborn. And then they buy it. The third group of people, there they are the hopefuls. These people are more introverted, and they're an interesting bunch of people because they are often women, and one of the things that they do is they always buy the latest anti-wrinkle treatment. They're absolutely convinced that they can reduce about 10 years off their age. But the more expensive the pot, the more years they'll reduce, and they spend an enormous amount of money on those types of things. They also believe in magic, and there's a whole bunch of these people out there who very quietly, without making very much noise about it, are fantasists and love the idea of magic. They love the idea that something based on alchemy can happen when they take supplements, and they often take an enormous number of them. The difficulty with these people is they don't stick to them. So they take something for 3 months, 4 months, and then they move on to something else. But they're a great bunch of people to employ in evangelizing for products because they love to talk about it, and they love to show people how different they look. So they'll say things like, can you see my hair looks so much stronger since I've taken this product? And people sort of go, yes, because you'd believe her, because she's very convincing. And then the fourth group, and this is a group that's very difficult for you to communicate with, without what I call high science or heavy science. And these are the disciples. If you find an omega-3 user who is at a disciple level, they keep it to themselves. They don't want to tell everybody else about it. They rather like the fact that they think they've got one step ahead of the rest of the population. But the interesting thing about them is that they have found proof. They've read a paper, or they have a friend who's a medical expert who's told them that, yes, indeed, this product does work. And you will never take it away from them. If you ask them not to take it for 10 days and come back and tell you how they felt after 10 days, they won't do it. The other groups will, but these guys won't. They're so committed to taking this product because they absolutely believe that it's a lifesaver. And I don't say that lightly, that they mean it. The really interesting thing is they will go to higher medical experts. And where the really heavy science seems to be missing, and listening to the 17th Surgeon General who talked about the importance of science at that medical expert level is so profound, we can't begin to tell you, because they are the ones who will start to feed this science down to the people, the consumers who frankly either believe in miracles or just hope that they can redeem themselves or take as much as possible to prevent something happening. But they don't untangle science in the way that a senior medical professional will for them. Now, going back to that suppressed worry and anxiety, we all have within us what we've described as the dark heart. It's our destiny. We won't be here in 100 years' time. Maybe we will. Maybe there are the optimists in this room who think we will, but potentially we won't. And the people that like omega-3 and buy into omega-3 and believe in omega-3 surround themselves by all sorts of very powerful barriers. to the dark heart. So they have goals to achieve, they set themselves tasks, they're very active often, they're very busy, they're very interested in control, they want to follow rules, they're incredibly positive in their attitude and approach to life. And they really believe that if you live right, you live long. They hate the idea that you can't beat your genes. In fact, somebody told me my legs were short because it was genetic, and I was quite disappointed. That was at lunchtime, gentleman over there. But I did ask him, so I mean, he didn't just pick on me. But it is something that there are certain things you can't change. Most people who buy Omega-3 and take Omega-3 believe they can make a change, and that's very important. When we ask people to talk about their lives and we try to map a life health journey across people's lifetime, from birth literally to death, what's really interesting is that up to the age of about 20, everybody does believe they're immortal. Short of something pretty tragic happening to them along the way, they don't think about dying. They just don't believe it's ever going to happen. And then suddenly something happens between the ages of about 20 and 25. Now, it could be the loss of somebody in your family. It could be the first time you don't get over a cold. It could be the first time a hangover lasts more than a day. It could be that you suddenly feel older, or you have a first baby, and you absolutely recognize that you have a lifespan. And that's when people start really engaging in these sorts of supplements and nutritional aids. And nobody really knows where to start. So they look out for messages that absolutely apply to their life stage. And one of the things that we discovered as we went along this road with people was that there are spike points. So your first baby at about 30, or your first stiff knee, or your first terrible bout of something like bronchitis or flu is where you start to think about these sorts of things. Once you've plateaued for about 5, 6, 7 years, suddenly there is this sense that you're going the wrong way. And it's a really scary moment for lots of people. 35, 36, you start forgetting things that you thought you could remember. You read an article that says that your brain cells have been dying for 10 years, and did you not know this? And you panic, or you can't keep up with your children because they're faster than you, or you find you can't cycle to work in the winter because it just doesn't feel good. And you know that you are now on what they call the declining slope. Sounds very depressing that it happens from 35, but it does. And lots of people remain in denial and just assume it doesn't happen. But the people who take Omega-3 really desperately want Omega-3 to make that plateau extend. So the notion of talking to them in a way which allows them to tap into that sense of retaining youth is a really, really powerful space to operate in between the ages of about 30 and 45. At 45 to 50, if you're a man, they tend to talk about getting a paunch, or about having a bit of a midlife crisis. That's often reported by their partners rather than them, but they do talk about it. Buying a Porsche, or going skiing when you really shouldn't, and then breaking a leg, or whatever happens. For women, it's the menopause. And that period in their lives is a massive milestone. It's when you get to 45, 50, and you suddenly realize that what's to come is definitely shorter than what's been. And that's where Omega-3 has an enormous opportunity to talk to people, and to talk to people in their language. And there's lots we can spend time on later on, but that is a really interesting space for people. And then you get to 65, sometimes 70, and there is a real sense of decline, and at that point you are managing decline. Now, mental health is one of the scariest spaces to start to enter for people who get to 60. They panic desperately about mental acuity. I'll just wait.
That's all right. You want to do it?
No, I got it.
Okay.
We're fine. We'll continue the meeting. If the fire alarm goes off again, we will all exit the room to the back. Thank you. Let's continue.
Now managing my decline. So, when they get that, mental acuity is a really, really big fear, and anything that we can do to talk about retaining mental acuity is a really interesting space for them, and also the idea of being very, very physically disabled, because you don't want to live a long life, you want to live a long, good life. So living well better is really, really important for them. When we ask people around the world what omega-3 was, this is the other really interesting thing. You talk to each other in very complex and sophisticated language about PUFAs and omegas and the different fatty acids and what they do and what they are and how they work. These people have no idea about that. Very few of them know. Most of the people we speak to say, I think it's from fish, potentially. And that's as far as they get. Some people say, I think it's particularly good for joints, or maybe for eyesight, or possibly for skin, or maybe even for the heart. Those who believe it's good for joints, it's simply because it's oil. And they think about the Tin Man. And they think about the fact that it goes around their body oiling the joints. That's literally what they believe. Longer term benefits, some people understand. I'm in it for the long term. If I take this product, I've got to take it over time. And then there's this really interesting space. And I think it was referred to earlier on by somebody, which is, unless you clarify how much of this stuff they're supposed to take, when they're supposed to take it, how often, for how long, for what effect. People feel that when they try to be more specific than it's from fish and it sort of does a bit of everything, they simply can't engage with the product because they don't understand what to do with it. And that, coupled with the notion of whether there is a toxic level, is there a level after which, if you take too much of this stuff, it's toxic? And is that to do with pollutants, or is that to do with what it does to your body? And should I worry about circulation? And is that an issue if I'm diabetic? All these questions are so scary for people because there are no real markers in the sand from the industry, that's where you do lose an enormous amount of integrity. Not because you're not telling people the truth, it's because you're not telling them anything. So you haven't built your box around the product, which helps people to navigate it. And only in Asia did we really feel that there was a really good understanding of DHA and EPA, and we did find that people understood that, and particularly within maternity, because of its presence in baby milks. Okay. This is just to show you that actually you can have quite a high-order conversation with consumers. And at the moment, the words that surround the supplement and nutrition market are words which are about what something does. It gives you increased movement, it lubricates your joints, it protects you from infection, it coats your muscles, it soothes your aching limbs, etc., etc. You can ladder up from that, and actually what people find omega-3 really powerful at doing is setting up some of those higher order benefits: freedom, confidence, the ease with which you can live your life. The next set of ladders are even higher order. So if you start talking about this being a future-focused, if you talk about investing in cellular health for the long term, and you talk about how long this can last for people and how robust and strong it can make their bodies and their minds, then you start to ladder up to really big, quite powerful emotional spaces, which are about immortality and invincibility, which these optimists, these powerful, active, engaged people are really interested in. And finally, if you talk about how this works in very simple terms, about how it can enter every cell of the body through the way that it operates and how it can permeate every part of you, then deep wellness is a really interesting, positive space that we've been working with BASF Pronova on, and we'll talk a little bit about that right at the end. And if you have a look just at the language beyond treatment, which is really interesting, these are just some quotes from people about how omega-3 treats you and puts your body in better working order. So just these two quotes: I worry less about the impact, I worry less, I just feel I have more energy. This is very interesting language for something which is semi-medicinal, which is what some people see it as. And at this higher level, I started taking it for the eyes, but my skin's brighter. I think I feel and look a lot better. I think I feel and look a lot better. I don't want to get motor neuron disease like my dad. You know, there's a big, old, difficult question to answer, but that's why they're taking omega-3. Or I just believe it works and I want to be as healthy and active for as long as I can. These top 3 levels of this pyramid are where omega-3 actually has what I've described as elixir status. And it's the notion that this has come from a very, very powerful, profound source, which is fish and deep, dark waters, and it has almost risen up to become like alchemy, like turning something deep and profound into a form of gold. And the people that buy it, I promise you, think like that. They don't think in terms of the science. They have the science to back it up, but they really do think of this as something magical. And that's a very important thing for us to remember when we think about the high science that we're being told we need to sort out. So how do we get past these ridiculous stories and the very difficult conversations that people are having in the press between themselves? Because the really interesting thing is there doesn't seem to be much pushback from the industry on some of these stories, and people have noticed that. And the reason that they happen is because we don't feel necessarily you've defined exactly what business you're in. So if we ask you what you're in the business of, you might tell me you're in the business of omega-3 or supplementation or pharmaceuticals, but actually you're in the business of extending valuable life. That's what people want you to do, and that's why they buy you. It's not about the fact that you're a PUFA or a 3 rather than a 6 and a 9, or that you're in a soft gel rather than in a liquid form. They are buying something that will help them to live longer, they think. And how do you achieve that? And this is a really important image. It's not an image anybody can use specifically because it's an amalgam of 3 different images that people constantly picked as very powerful representations visually of what this product does. You achieve the extension of valuable life through a combination of pioneering science, and it is really important that the science at the root of everything omega-3 does, and faith-based trust. Fish and fish oils are spiritually based. The fish are biblical, and it is quite an important part of how this product works. They are also very naturally sourced, but they're very scientifically crafted. And this image, which is actually a combination of the double helix northern lights and a sort of cellular reincarnation of a woman, is exactly how people see omega-3 operating. And how they rationalize the faith is through evidence. And Norwegian provenance and Scandinavian provenance is one area that we've found very powerful in terms of evidencing the strength and believability or integrity of omega-3. So here's some quotes. My gran, who's so old and yet so vital, is a real testament to a daily dose of fish oils. And people have been taking cod liver oil for many, many years, which they see as the early form of fish oils. You don't need scientific trials. You look at the types of people who are strong in old age. Most of them are having hard lives, but they've taken the cod liver oil and they're all right. So these robust, older, strong, capable, beautiful people are a really powerful, very simple visual way of reinforcing the strength of omega-3. Now, we wanted to put these quotes up as well. They're really interesting. I won't read through them all, but we asked some incredibly powerful, very bright Boston consumers, many of whom were medically minded. There was a novelist, there were 2 publishers, there was a banker, there were 2 businesswomen. They came along to talk about why they love omega-3, and we asked them to describe how it worked without using science. And the really interesting thing about these quotes is if you look at how they've described the way the product works, it is magical, it is extraordinary, and when they finished describing it, they said, this makes us much more excited than you telling us exactly what it does. This is something which really empowers us to keep taking this, and we feel as though it brings our bodies and minds to life. It's like electricity, internal electricity, and it helps them to feel that their bodies can help themselves, and that's the really interesting space. It empowers their bodies to be better. So these are lovely quotes, and we just thought you might like to see them, and there's a hard copy of all of this so you can read them through. So how do you start differentiating in this market? It is important that there are 2 elements to omega-3 which make it special and more special than the rest of it. So if you've got a category, you have to have a special end, because if you don't have a special end, a premium end, people can't understand what they're buying. You have to be able to navigate. And the 2 ways that they currently try to understand the hierarchy of products is through purity and potency. But the messaging that you're giving them is, and Jill will go on to talk about this in a moment, is incredibly overpowering. So one of the things that you can do is you can think about how you'd strip that back. purity is about simplicity. It's about nothing added, nothing taken away. And actually, that's a more powerful message than a very clumsy and complicated filtration message. Similarly, potency is just strong, and that's really interesting to people. Provenance and heritage are two other really powerful tools in your armory, where you've got this from, how you've sourced it, and how long you've been going, and how high quality your product can be because of the amount of research that you've done over the amount of years. And finally, brand integrity and brand transparency. To Rohit's point, if brands are honest about what they can and can't do, and they tell the story in a very simple and straightforward way, then that's also very powerful for people. Now I'm going to hand over to Jill. I've talked about the consumer. Jill's now going to talk about how the category communicates with the consumer and what we can learn from that.